All right, so I have the 4 brackets just loosely placed on the top of the Modix. And then all we're gonna do is move our bracket over here to the top. So now, if you'll have a look, get a little bit of a zoom in here. I already have the T-nuts placed into the slots here inside where they're going to go. So because these brackets are loose, the T-nuts are already laid in place, I'm simply going to put these brackets, I'm going to lay them properly, push the T-nuts down where they need to be. I'm going to try and get out of your way here so that I can do this properly. Lay the T-nuts down here. Now, at this point, not that I'm saying from experience, don't walk away until you finish bolting in all 4 corners, because somebody may come along and go, oh, that looks really cool, and move the machine and knock your frame off. So we'll get those in place. Now bear in mind, none of this am I tightening up at this point. I generally, as I've said all along, I generally wait until I get all of my current parts in place, and then I'll go back around afterwards and snug everything in. When you're dealing with aluminum extrusion, it doesn't flex very well. So it's much better as you're assembling it to put it together a little loose and then kind of snug it up once you know it's not going to fall over or get knocked out of place anywhere. Always a spare in the bag. There's at least 1 spare, I'm pretty sure, of almost every bolt in there. So if you're short 1, don't panic. If it's a common bolt, they always do put a couple of spares in there. Okay, so at this point, I'm now snugging up the brackets to the top rail assembly, because we now know this is not going to move any further. So we can tighten this up. And then we're going to start tightening down our base plates. So bear in mind, we still have to put enclosures on over top of this. You want the enclosures on the lid and the enclosures in the rest of the body to be level. So I'll show you when we get to the front, we'll zoom in a little better, but set the extrusion distance so you still have enough distance or enough space on there to be able to set the panels up. So where this extrusion sits, you want it set back so that it's level with the inside edge of all these outside panels. Because you have a little bit of wiggle room, as you can see here. So you can move it around just a little bit to get it to line up exactly where you want it. Okay, so when you do this, if you have a look at this extrusion, this is your outside panel. Move your extrusion in so that it's level with the back of the extrusion, and do the same on this side. Once you have it in that position, then you can tighten it down. So now it's ready to accept the panel on the outside, and this will no longer move. So at this point in time, your lid is bolted solidly to your frame. Now we're going to start finalizing the position of all of this. Our back edge here, this piece of connecting extrusion is going to be flush with the very back edge here, because again, we're going to have a panel that bolts on here. This mid-beam, we're going to loosen this up and we're going to move it to its final position. And where that position is going to be, we can slide this up here. Where its final position is going to be is 15 millimeters from this face to this face. So again, we're going to want this to be back set. So this face is 15 millimeters behind this plastic cover. And what that's for is when we build our door is going to go in this location. We want our door to be back set off the off the frame so that when the enclosure closes, everything remains sealed as well as we can. So the easiest way to do this, just grab your measuring tape and do your measurement of 15 millimeters. Once the front bracket is in, you can tighten up the back ones. So our top lid's done. The next section to this is going to be, we're going to add our panel to the top, like this, and then we're going to start filling in around our edges. So let me get some of this covering peeled off the panels, and we'll come back and start getting everything bolted back into place. All right, so doing a little bit of work off camera, I set this top panel in place, and I actually put the 4 screws in for the hinges, and I put the 1 screw in the center back. When I was trying to do that, I realized that this bar was actually about 3 millimeters too far to the rear to be able to get this upper plate to bolt in properly. So what I did was I released the 4 corner brackets that were here. I slid this front bar out. I simply took these plastic covers off so that I could slide this bar straight out. I took off the 2 front 90-degree brackets, and then I slid it back in place. So now, excuse me for a second. So now I can move that front piece of extrusion forward, like I say, about 3 millimeters, 2.5 to 3 millimeters, moved it forward. Then all of my screws set in place properly. I'm not sure if it might be a defect in the top of the lid or if it might be these corner brackets might be a little long. Either way, there is a workaround for it. Once I've reinserted, I've tightened back up the corner brackets on the inside, and now I know for sure everything is going to be sitting in here properly. So at this point, I'm just going to pull out these 4 screws that I had temporarily put in place. And I'm going right back to the directions online. Leave those screws up there. And now I'm simply going to, instead of the low profile screws that I had in there, I'm simply going to attach the hinges that we're going to be using to attach our pivot door very shortly. All right. Now we're right back on track. So basically all that's left for the top lid right now for enclosure wise is the 3 panels. There's 2 identical panels on both sides. There's 1 panel in the rear. I'm going to give you a reminder on the rear panel right now. 2 side panels are identical. The rear panel has this vent hole. So when we're dealing with the vent hole, remember that you have to use that small square block, bolt that in here first, and then you can go ahead and install this one directly onto the rear. So once we have it covered, we're going to bolt that in this location. I'm going to go ahead and bolt on these panels, the 3 top ones. When I come back, we're going to be working on the front pivot door. Then we'll get that fitted up, and then we move on to the doors down below. All right. So we're back doing the pivot lid assembly. The pivot lid assembly is the door on the upper part of the machine, basically above the gantry. So when we're doing this, the only thing you require is the pivot lid bag, which has in it all the parts that you need to be able to assemble this. You need 4 pieces of extruded aluminum, 2 at 655 and 2 at 280, 2 at 280. And so I've already started putting a couple of them together here because you've seen me do it before at this point. Just bear in mind when you're doing this that one of these pieces of extrusion has 2 holes in it for the handle. Make sure that the handle is facing in the opposite direction to the uprights that you're attaching. Other than that, we're just going to continue with the process. Put our L brackets in place. Slide our extrusion in. And lock it all down where it needs to be. Okay. Once we have our frame in place, I'm putting it down here with the 2 holes in the extrusion towards me. I'm going to move the rest of this gear here out of the way for a moment. And let's just lay our plastic, our lid cover, on top. And I'm just double checking to make sure that all of our holes line up. So once we've confirmed that, we're going to peel off the protective cover off both sides. So the next part is we're going to take some of our T-nuts. We're going to drop them in place. These particular ones make it much easier to get lined up because you can see your T-nuts right through the glass. So there's 3 across the top, 4 across the bottom, and 1 on each side. Now, once we start getting them lined up, we're going to grab our M8 low profile screws. So once I roughly put the 2 side ones in, then I can get everything squared. I just pull the plastic up slightly just so I can get at the T-nuts and pull them where I need them to be. Everything's in and square. Just give them a little snug. Don't crank these down too tight because this is plexiglass. If you tighten it down too much, it will crack it. We just need to hold it in place. We don't need to really force it in there. Once that's done, then you're going to deal with the handle. You'll notice there's 2 notches in the plastic here where the handle is actually going to lay out. Now, in case your kit does not come with these screws, or you don't want to use the screws with your kit, you can use 4 millimeter, 25 millimeter length Allen bolts. They will hold this on just as well. And that way, if you don't want to see the silver, you don't have to. Okay, so that's it for the door itself. The only thing we have left to do for this is I'm actually going to add 4 T-nuts in the top channel for us to be able to attach the hinge to once we get up there. I've got one here that's actually missing one of the balls in the bottom of it, so we'll just get that one out of the way. Now, with the orientation for these T-nuts, I'm going to show you real quick. Notice how the holes are towards each other. I'm just doing that way so that I know for sure I have enough space to be able to attach the hinges to the top of these when I get them to the top of the machine. So we can set this aside for right now. We're going to move into a little bit of a hard part to put together. So this is basically your stop. So when this is together, when your lid is down, your hinge is going to be in this configuration. So when you pull your door out, it's going to come up and it's going to allow you to drop this into a slot so it will hold it straight and hold your door out so you're not going to be squeezing your fingers or anything in it, and the door doesn't drop out of your way. So according to the pictures that they have on the installation manual or the assembly manual, the bracket they used when they took the pictures in the online manual is actually the opposite side. So they're saying here to install this bracket on the left side of the machine. This particular bracket is backwards, so this bracket is going to be installed on the right side of the machine. It does fit. The last machine I received was actually opposite as well. It works fine either direction. It's just when you're trying to get this block together in it, it gets a little confusing when you're watching it in the sheet and realize that it's actually a mirror image. So when you have a look at this bracket, you'll notice there's just a notch cut out of one half of the hinge. The other half has kind of a rollover or a 90-degree bend in it. So don't worry about that one for now. The piece we're concentrating on is the one with the straight cutout in it. When you're dealing with this hinge assembly, again, this hinge is going to go on the right side of this machine, not the left as is noted on the online manual. So when we deal with this, we're going to be looking at this piece with the notch. Lay it down on the table so that it's on your right side. Take the hinge assembly, flip it backwards, or what I consider to be backwards. In there, there's a printed adapter piece. This adapter piece is basically to put the hinge in the correct place so the door holds 90 degrees. So this piece is going to go on with the dimple towards the rivet that's on the hinge. So when you lay that on here, you're going to put these two bolts through. And that's how the hinge is going to be set up. This particular printed block is going to be attached to the frame on the Modix, and this part of the assembly is going to be attached to the door. So I'm going to leave this the way it is right now. We're going to go ahead and get the hinge attached to the door and get the door hung on the machine. So what I've basically done is I've taken our door and I've laid it upside down on top of the Modix. The reason why I've done this is so that I can line up these T-nuts with the holes in the hinges. Now there is a trim piece here that you put on this as well. It will help with that. So when you lay this trim piece up, again, you can center these where they need to be. And then when you put your trim piece in place, note that the holes for the hinges are slightly offset. So you'll want to put the offset or the shorter side of the hole towards the back of the door. So when we place this, I'm going to place this on the hinges here just to get this easier to see. Now, the reason why you're placing the offset of the hinges towards the back of the door is because this piece overhangs the plexiglass on the front, so you'll want it to cover it. Just make sure it's always covered, looks a little prettier. So the edges of this will actually line up with the plexiglass on the front or the clear plastic on the front of the door. So just use your fingers and tighten that up there. To attach the hinges, we're now going to move our door down, put it in place where it needs to be. Flip your hinges over the top so they're out of your way. Once you get the door in, flip your hinges back down. Now, so with your hinges in place, your door operates, no problem. All your screws and everything are tight. Now what we're going to do is we're going to install our hinge bracket over here on this side. So temporarily, I can flip this door all the way up and I can show you a little more access to what we're going to do next. The first step is we're going to install two T-nuts in here, and we have to put two more T-nuts on the inside of this extrusion. So on the inside of this extrusion, still doing almost the same thing. I'm putting the holes towards each other like this. Putting them up at about this level here. So So with that in place, I'm going to grab my hinge assembly. When you put this hinge in, this bracket is going to be bending in this direction. So if you're looking at it as if it was mounted inside the machine, this black plastic piece is going to be mounted to the inside of this extrusion. This piece is going to be mounted to the back of the door. So when you pull it out, it's going to go in this direction and it's going to fall in to lock into place. So what I've found is it's easier if you install the solid part on the Modix first and then put it on the door. So we'll pull the door out of our way. Once that's installed, pull your hinge outside and move this plastic block all the way as far down as it will go. Once it touches this red bracket, you can go ahead and tighten it up. The next part is we're going to attach this hinge. As soon as I grab the right Allen key, we're going to attach the hinge assembly to the top of the door. So when we go to the door, now we're going to flip this bracket around so that it's flat side up. Mine has ended up to be almost perfectly straight. In Modix instructions, they state that this bracket should be approximately 70 millimeters from the bottom of the extrusion. I'm just going to double check the measurement. I'm at, oh sorry, from the top of the door down, I'm at 80. So the door is a little low. I'm going to move it back about 10 millimeters. This is not an exact. This is where they recommend so that it will sit 90 degrees. And I'm right at 70 right there. So when I tighten these brackets down for the final time, I'm using my finger on the outside of the bracket and I'm pushing it towards the middle of the machine. Now I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. A, because I'm pushing it against the extrusion, it's going to be straight and parallel to the door. The second reason I'm doing that is I'm actually pushing these two rivets slightly off the extrusion here so you're not scratching it when you're opening and closing the door. So to operate this is very simple. Push up on the door slightly, push the hinge into the Modix, and when you lower the door down, it will come out of the way. Now I am actually hitting the door here, so it's actually preventing it from closing all the way. I'm going to do a little bit of an adjustment. I will be right back and we'll make sure that everything is adjusted the way that it should be. All right, so I got a little bit ahead. I'm assembling these doors for the front of the machine. You've seen me assemble many doors up until this point in time, so the excitement level at this point is not really high. The biggest trick to these doors, you have to remember the long sections of the extrusion go inside of the short pieces of the extrusion. So the corner brackets on the inside go together the same way. Ensure that when you're putting these together, you have the two handles, the two holes for the handle aiming towards one of your open faces on the door. Once you get your glass, lay that in place. And then you can start screwing everything down. Now, as I'm getting into this, I will remind you that when you put the plexiglass on, make sure that you put the plexiglass on the correct side for the holes of the door. It goes together much easier that way. So, as I'm doing this, I'm just going to make mention to you, the hinges in the Modix are a little different on these doors than they were in the top pivot door. These hinges are actually an extrusion style hinge with a center pin or center pivot. So the two sides of the hinges are actually different. There's a 40-40 side and there is a 20-20 side. As we're going installing them, it's a little bit of a trick to try and get them leveled and square in the door. Try not to get frustrated with it. It is easy to do, unfortunately. Just stick with it. It will come together little by little. As I'm installing it on this one, we will have a look and make sure we get everything all lined up straightly, or properly. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm a little short in screws. I just have to dig around here and find a couple that I'm short. So I am unfortunately short 2 screws on this particular door. What I am going to do is I'm going to continue the process of installing the door and getting it hung. I will have to locate a couple of screws in the spare parts bag, but I'm not going to hold up the video for that. So once you get your glass on, make sure everything feels tight and square all the way around, and then snug down your screws. Same as what I had mentioned on the top pivot door, you don't need to tighten these down really tight. If you do over tighten them, you will crack the glass. We want to try and avoid that. Okay. So next part in the door is we're going to put in the handle. Same handle as what was on the pivot door, 2 screws in the back. Handle through the front. Same as putting a set of handles on your kitchen cupboard. All right, so let's lay the door assembly aside for a moment and let's have a look at the hinges. Now these hinges, as I referred to, they're a 3-piece design and they're a little different than what you might be used to looking at. So the small section of the hinge is what's going to mount to the actual door. The larger part of the hinge is what mounts to the frame cabinet. So this is a hinge section for 40-40 extrusion. This is a hinge section for 20-20. These hinges simply go together with a cross pin. They have an E-clip in the middle of them. So they will drop in one side and then you drop the other part on the other. So when you put these together, notice the conical sides of the screws both go in the same direction. So I already have the left-hand door already installed, so I'm going to be installing these ones on the right. So let's actually set this up so that it will be proper for the side we're working on, which is going to be this direction. So I need 2 hinges set up the same way. And when we go mount this on the machine, we're going to be using the M5x12 conicals on the 40-40 side, and we're going to be using the M5x8 conicals on the 20-20 side. So we'll move over to the machine and we'll get this door mounted up. All right, so we have our door assembly done. I'm still missing 2 screws. I will find them later. So let's lay this door out of the way here for right now. This is the orientation that the door is going to go in this machine. It is going to lay in that hole just like that. So let's lay it aside for a second and let's get our hinges straightened out. I have the T-nuts already dropped in the slots here. So I'm going to loosely put these in. And roughly you will notice as you're putting these in, there's actually a notch cut out of this piece of trim on the front that the hinge does fit within. This is a good starting point if you're wondering exactly where your hinge is going to end up. So when you look at this particular cutout, I kind of set it a little loose, but I set it inside this notch. The plastic here on the door also has the same notch in it as well. We will get to that once we get the door in place and we start installing that. Okay. So once we get that in place again, we'll slide that down so that it roughly fits in the notch. And then we'll just tighten them to a touch. All right, next is our 5mm by 8mm conical head bolts. And these are going to go in the door. Now, I already have the T-slot nuts set in place here in the door. I'm going to just attach to one of them at this point until I can get some rough adjustment done. So I'm going to attach one of these for a moment and I'm going to show you something. So right now, if I try and adjust this door up or down, both of these sides of this hinge are actually attached, but if I try and move it up and down, the hinge will actually start to separate. So as you're adjusting this hinge position or the door on the hinge, make sure that this hinge is together and that you're only moving the door inside of the slot, inside the T-slot of the hinge. So when I'm adjusting this, I'm going to adjust it I'm going to leave about 1mm or 2 of gap between the top of the door and the edge of the Modix. I think this is actually going to be too much on this one. The door gap on these are actually pretty tight. But for right now, getting this together and letting the hinges help me support the door, I'm going to leave it at that. Move the other T-nut in spot. So I've got my second hinge attached, and you'll actually notice that now I've developed a little bit of a gap between the two hinge points. So let's just see where we're at with the door. It's actually not bad. It's a little tight here at the top, but I think once I tighten in the hinges, I think that may actually come in. So positioning that's actually pretty good. So let's loosen this a little bit. Let's get these two hinge halves together. And then I can start snugging down all of these screws. Okay. It's the bottom hinge all snugged in. So let's double check our door for operation again. We're okay here so far, top and bottom. Let's get the rest of this attached. So it's a little tight. I can adjust that a little bit. And I think we'll be okay. So let me do the adjustment on this, and then I will be back and we'll run through the final overlook of the machine. All right, so the very last part of this process to get our Modix Big 40 finished up is the magnetic door catches. So the way Modix does these, it's basically 2 high strength magnets screwed into a plate. There's one plate going to be screwed at the bottom, and then the opposite's going to be screwed at the top. Once that's complete, you then insert a T-nut and a conical black screw into the actual door itself, and the door is what gets caught on the magnet. So when I was doing the adjustment on the doors for this machine, they're a little tight. The way Modix does these doors, it's almost impossible, at least the couple that I've done, it's very difficult to get the doors to close smoothly without, you can't open one door without opening both. So this is holding true in this one as the other ones that I've done. Basically the doors, you almost need to open them as a pair, close them as a pair. I have about as much adjustment done on it as what can be done in the current configuration. They still rub just a little bit as they're going closed. So just to prevent it from damaging the door or damaging the plastic, I would suggest just opening and closing them as a pair. But anyway, we're going to put together another assembly like this. And you have to bear in mind these magnets, I'm not sure if they're actually neodymium magnets or not, whatnot. They are very strong. So when you're putting these together, you're going to use the conical screw inside the magnet itself. You're then going to screw it onto the bracket. Now, once you screw this down, do not apply any amount of force to this. When it touches, stop. Any more force than that, the magnet itself will split and it will become non-functional for you. You don't need a lot of force for this to hold on. So once you get this here, just put your screws in. Then you're going to use 4 of your low profile screws, 8mm. I already have the T-nuts inserted to the back of the extrusion on the inside of the machine. So I'm going to show you by installing this upper one. Then I'm going to put the magnetic catches on the inside of the door. So let's just move over to the machine and then we'll get it finished up. All right, so the final part of the install is we're actually going to install our magnets here in the doors. The magnets I have done at the bottom. I also have the stoppers installed as well. So let me get this magnetic catch installed at the very top, and then we will do the stoppers on the door. So in here on the inside, I have the T-nuts installed on the back side of that channel. This 2040 extrusion that we have mounted behind the decor panel. So I just simply slid 2 T-nuts inside that extrusion, and then I'm just attaching our magnetic catch base to it. So if you close your door, have a look, you can kind of center it over the door. There you go. So once you have that in place, you slide one of the conical screws into another T-slot nut, like this. And then you're actually going to just slide that inside the channel on the door. So approximately where this fits is this nut's going to be just approximately over top of the inside of the upper extrusion, and that should, I'm a little off. Sometimes you might have to move it a little bit left to right just to get it to hit the magnet in just the right spot. So once that gets done, you finish up your doors, get those installed. We've already done our calibration and our firmware updates. So the next steps you want to do with this is on Modix's website, you could download, there's a cube, calibration cube STL file you can download. It's actually a G-code file, so it's already done, configured, ready to go for this particular machine. You download it based on your machine and the nozzle that you have installed in it. After you do your calibration cube, then there is a mesh. There's a mesh that you're going to print across the entire bed. If you get these 2 prints to successfully print, then you're good to go. You can then move forward with any other test prints you want to do. Next time we come back, you're going to see some prints that we have done off this machine, and then we're going to have a complete rundown through it and kind of show you some of the features and options. So we'll see you back here shortly.